Hey guys, today you're going to be using the quadratic formula, so it's pretty exciting stuff. This is the tattoo that is on my arm. Um, so what the quadratic formula is just a shortcut for completing the square. If you take a trinomial that's in the form x squared plus bx plus c, and you solve it for x, that's what it would come out to be. Um, it is super fast whenever you get used to the process of doing it to solve any polynomial that has an exponent of 2 on it. So there's a little song to help you remember it. I'll sing it for you here. You can replay it till you got it down because it's pretty easy to memorize. It gets to the tune "Pop Goes the Weasel." It goes like this: x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There you go. Replay it as much as you want. You're welcome. Okay, so to solve a quadratic equation by the quadratic formula, you're going to put it in standard form, so that means set it equal to 0. If there's any fractions, we'll get rid of those to make it easier on ourselves. We'll identify a, b, and c. A is the number in front of the squared term, b is the number in front of the x term, c is the normal number. You're going to replace a, b, and c in the quadratic formula and then simplify that process. Okay, so here we go. Number 1. A is the number in front of the squared term, so a would be 3. B is the number in front of the x term, so b would be 1. C is the normal number, c is negative 3. So we include the sign if it's negative. Okay, then we're just going to plug it into the formula. So we'll write it down until we've got it memorized. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then all we have to do is plug it in as it states. So the opposite of b, so negative 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. 1 squared is still 1, minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. That's going to be 6. I'll do that part. All right, so there's just the most simplification is in here. That's called the determinant, by the way. What's under the radical is the determinant because it determines how many solutions you have. We'll talk about that in just a second. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 3 is positive 36. So we've got 1 plus 36. That's the square root of 37, right? You follow that. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 3 is 36. 2 negatives makes a positive. 1 plus positive 36 is positive 37. Okay, so let's write what we have. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 37 all over 6. Can we simplify the square root of 37? No, I believe it's prime. So there's your solution. X is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 37 all over 6. Now you could go through the process of completing the square, but it's going to be a lot more work than just doing the quadratic formula. So you see it's very quick, very easy, and you can do that. On number 2, notice it is not set equal to 0, so our first step, quadratic formula, when you're using it, must be set equal to 0. So you would subtract 5, and now it is set equal to 0. So we'll identify A is 2, B is negative 9, C is negative 5. And then we'll write down the formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Then all I have to do is plug it into the formula. So the opposite of b would be positive 9 plus or minus the square root of b squared, that would be 81, minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, 2 times 2 is 4. All right, so the most simplification again is just right in there. 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 5 is 40, and I have 2 negatives, so that would be a positive 40. So 81 plus 40 is 121. And I look at that, and hey, that's a perfect square. What's the square root of 121? It is 11. So I have 9 plus or minus 11 over 4. So whenever I can simplify that radical to a normal number, remember we can do the math. So we got to apply the plus or minus part. So the plus part, 9 plus 11 is 20. 20 divided by 4 is 5. The minus part, 9 minus 11 is negative 2. Negative 2 over 4 reduces to negative 1/2. So there are your two solutions, 5 and negative 1/2. So that, what does that mean? Remember, that means that original quadratic was factorable. So we could have factored it, but the quadratic formula is quicker because you don't have to think about anything. You just plug it into the formula. It's a plug and chug day. This one's set equal to 0. So we're going to say what A, B, and C is. And then we're just going to plug it into that formula. Write it down until you've got it memorized. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And then if you're cool enough, you'd put it on your bicep. If you're not cool enough, you'd put it on your leg. Okay, plug it into the formula. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root B squared is still 1 minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. That's 10. Okay, so let's see. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 times 2 is 40. 2 negatives makes a positive, so that would be 41. That one doesn't simplify, so we'll just rewrite it. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 41 all over 10. It can't simplify any further because there's no perfect square that divides 41 as its prime. Number 4, again like 2, we need to set it equal to 0. So it's going to be 3x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. A would be 3, B would be 2, C would be negative 8. Write down the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. We just got to plug it in. If B is negative, the opposite of B would be negative 2 plus or minus the square root. 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. That would be 6. Do the math here. 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 8 is 96. So 4 plus 96 would be the square root of 100. And much like 2, that is a perfect square, so we can simplify it. Negative 2 plus or minus 10 over 6. And then that means we can apply it. Negative 2 plus 10 is 8. 8 over 6 reduces to 4 over 3. Negative 2 minus 10 is negative 12. Negative 12 divided by 6 is negative 2. So we get two normal number solutions. On back, just a few more problems. We're just going to practice these. What happens if you have one like this? Well, first, it's not set equal to 0, so you would subtract 1. Okay, and then you look at that, and, well, it's set equal to 0, so we can identify A is 7. B, now there is no normal x, so what would be, how many x's are there? 0. B is 0 in this case. And then C is negative 1. Then we just got to plug it in once again. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. All right, plugging it in. The opposite of 0 is still 0. I probably wouldn't even write 0 out there. I would just start with the plus or minus the square root of B squared, which is 0, so I'm not going to write that again, minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. That would be 14. All right, negative 4 times 7 is negative 28. Negative 28 times negative 1 is positive 28. Okay, is there a perfect square that divides 28? Yes. Remember, 28 is the same as 4 times 7. So the square root of 4 times the square root of 7. So that would be 2 square roots of 7 plus or minus 2 square roots of 7 over 14. Now that means this fraction is reducible. Since both of these numbers outside of the radical are divisible by 2, we can do that. So it would reduce to plus or minus 1, but we don't really need the 1. So plus or minus the square root of 7 over 7. Remember, we can't divide the 7s because this one is inside of the radical and that one is not. So that would be our answer there. Plus or minus the square root of 7 over 7. All right, it kind of leaked into 6 here, so hopefully I've got enough room. I think I will. Again, set it equal to 0, so we'd bring the negative x over, we'd bring the negative 1 over, so x squared plus x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, so that means A would be 1, B would be 1, and C would be 1. They're all 1. Wow, how neat. Okay, let's write down the formula. I'll write it over here, so I'll give myself more room. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Plug it in. That would be negative 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is still 1, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 1. I keep writing the letters, I don't know why. All over 2a, 2 times 1 is still 2. Okay, inside of there, let's do the math. 4 times 1 is 4. 1 minus 4 is the square root of negative 3. I stop there, and I notice I get a negative inside of the radical, inside of that determinant. Remember, you can't take the square root of a negative number. This is no real solution. So if you ever get a negative inside of that radical, you will have no solution. So keep an eye out for that. 7 and 8 looks like we have fractions. So remember what I told you? Get rid of the fractions to make it convenient for you. Start by multiplying by the common denominator. On this one, it would be 2. What's half of 2? Half of 2 is 1. So 1x squared, or just x squared. 2 times negative x is negative 2x, and 2 times 2 is 4. Now we got to get this equation set equal to 0. So bring that 4 over, and it would be x squared minus 2x minus 4 equals 0. So a is 1, b is negative 2, c is negative 4. Write down the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now you just got to plug it in. Opposite of b would be positive 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared. Now negative 2 squared is still positive 4 minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. 2 times 1, still 2. Okay, do the math in here. 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. There's a negative out front, so it's 4 plus 16. That would be the square root of 20. And then again, think of that. What perfect square divides 20? 4. 4 times 5 is 20. So that square root of 20 simplifies to 2 square roots of 5. So we have 2 plus or minus 2 square roots of 5 all over 2. Now, again, I notice everything, all of the normal numbers are divisible by 2. And it has to be that case because it's all over 2. Every whole number has to be divisible by that denominator. So since they're all divisible by 2, we would divide them by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I don't need that 1 because there's a square root of 5 tagging along. So I get x is 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. 8, much like 7, this might be a good time for you to pause the video and try it if you want. Otherwise, here we go. Multiply by the common denominator, that is 5. 1/5 of 5 is 1, so it would just be x squared minus 5x equals 5. Set it equal to 0 by subtracting 5. So a is 1, b is negative 5, c is negative 5. Okay, you just got to plug it into the quadratic formula, so let's write that quadratic formula down. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so the opposite of b would be 5 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which would be 25, minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 5, all over 2a, still 2. All right, do the math inside of that determinant. 4 times 5 is 20. That would be a positive 20. 25 plus 20 is 45. Square root of 45 inside of there. Is there a perfect square that divides it? Yes. 9. 9 times 5 is 45. So what do we get? 5 plus or minus the square root of 9 is 3 square roots of 5 all over 2. And then I look at that, and it doesn't reduce this time, so that's going to be my answer. 5 plus or minus 3 square roots of 5 all over 2. Okay. On the bottom, it says approximate the solutions to the nearest tenth. So what does that mean? It means we're going to plug it into the calculator and round it to the nearest tenth. Okay, so this one's already set equal to 0. A is 5, b is negative 7, c is 1. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Plug it into that formula, and you would have 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. That would be 10. Okay, 4 times 5 is 20, times 1 is still 1. 49 minus 20 is the square root of 29. Now that does not simplify, so I'm just going to rewrite it. 7 plus or minus the square root of 29 divided by 10. Okay, so that would be our normal solution typically, but they want us to round that to the nearest tenth. So we're going to plug it into our calculator piece by piece. We're going to do the plus one, and we're also going to do the minus one. So we'd have 7 plus the square root of 10, close that parenthesis. Oh, why did I say 10? Shoot, sorry. 7 plus the square root of 29 divided by 10. Rounded to the nearest tenth would be 1.2. Now notice I'm putting equal first before I'm dividing by 10. If you don't, it's going to do PEMDAS, and it's just going to take that, divide it by 10, and then it's going to add 7 to it. So make sure you do it piece by piece, or if you want, you need to put the 7 plus the square root of 29 in its own set of parentheses if you want to do it all at once. I'll show you how to do that on the minus one. So if you don't use parentheses, you got to do it in 2 steps, so that would be 1.2. If you want to do it all in one line, you need to put the numerator in its own set of parentheses. So it would be 7 minus the square root of 29. Now notice we need 2 parentheses there because it starts its own parenthesis for that radical divided by 10. So that's how you have to do it if you want to do it all in one line. The numerator needs its own set of parentheses. Rounded to the nearest tenth would be 0.2. Try 10. Pause the video. Let's see how you do. A is 1, B is 3, C is -7. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Plug it in. -3 plus or minus the square root of B squared, which is 9, minus 4 times A times C all over 2A, still 2. Okay, 7 times 4 is 28. That would be a positive 28. 9 plus 28 is 37. And the square root of 37, again, does not simplify. So we'd have -3 plus or minus the square root of 37 all over 2. So that's the exact answer. The approximate answer we would get by rounding to the nearest tenth. So we'll just type that into our calculator again. So -3, I'll do it in one line this time. -3 plus the square root of 37 divided by 2. Rounded to the nearest tenth is 1.5. And then the other version, I can just hit, not answer, I can hit my previous entry, scroll over, change that to a minus, and rounded to the nearest tenth would be -5 or -4.5. Awesome. Let me know if you have any questions on that. We do have one final little thing to talk about, and that's what I've kind of been hinting at. It is the discriminant. So the part b squared minus 4ac is called the discriminant because it determines how many solutions the equation will produce. If the determinant, if the b squared minus 4ac part is positive, we get 2 solutions, and you see that on all our equations. That's what the plus or minus, there's 2 solutions there. If the determinant comes out to be 0, you'll just have 1 solution, and if it's negative, you'd have no real solution, like we saw on example number 6 on the previous page. So all we're going to do here is we're going to determine the number of solutions by looking at the discriminant. So we're just going to be looking at the b squared minus 4ac part. So in this equation, b would be 1, I guess we need all of them. A is 3, and C is -3. So all we're going to do is plug into that part. So b squared would be 1 minus 4 times A times C. So that would be 1 plus 4 times 3 is 12, times 3 is 36. So I get a positive number. So since I have a positive number, I would have 2 solutions. Here, A would be 1, B would be -6, C would be 9. So b squared minus 4ac is the only part we're looking at. So that would be 36 minus 4 times 1 times 9. That's 36, so I got 0. 36 minus 36 is 0, so that would be 1 solution. On 3, A is 5, B is 1, C is -2. b squared minus 4ac is the determinant. That's the only part we're looking at here. B squared is 1 minus 4 times a times c. So that would be 20 times 2 is 40. So that's a positive 40. So that'd be 41. That's a positive number. So I'd have two solutions. On this one, a is 5, b is 0, c is 4. So we're just looking at b squared minus 4ac. So that'd be 0 minus 4 times a times c, which is 4. So that's going to be 0 minus 80. That's negative 80. I got a negative number. That would be no solution. Try 5 on your own. See if you get it. A is 1. B is negative 10. C is 35. B squared minus 4ac. Okay, b squared would be a 100 minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 35 is what, 140? Let's check. I don't want to be wrong. Yeah, 140. So 100 minus 140 would be negative 40. That's a negative number, so again, no solution. All right, there's the determinant. It just determines how many solutions you're going to have. Let me know if you need any help. Good luck on my math lab. Have fun with that quadratic formula, y'all. See ya.